like WhatsApp, WeChat. These are the platforms that people have now available at their disposal to communicate. So it makes it a lot easier to get your voice out there. So before, the trend used to be that, a lot of people didn't have power or couldn't reach out to the government at any time they wanted to. Now they can, but there's a lot of accurate information. There's a lot of misinformation as well. There's a lot of pressure on the governments globally, not just in Nigeria, trying to keep up with, citizens being a lot more empowered to speak up for themselves. So basically, news travels at the speed of light. So we're here to really discuss how governments can, keep up with that, what trends governments, communications professionals as well can get onto, or systems and structures they can put in place to make sure that they are meeting the needs of their constituencies. So the first question I'll be throwing out will be to Shola, really. What's your general assessment of public communications in Nigeria?
So yeah, and thanks to Corey, and thanks to everyone for joining. All the 42 people here online, you're welcome. Thanks for joining us. I like the fact that you're already chatting in there. That's the way we want it to be. Keep it interactive, have conversations within yourselves. And yes, also drop questions, as Corey has said. So my general assessment of public sector communications in Nigeria, I would say, well, on one hand, one thing I like is the fact that almost every public agency in Nigeria has a Twitter handle. And the fact that we have embraced in Nigeria the fact that communications is real time and that we respond to issues in real time. So me growing up in a Nigeria where it was about press releases and, NTA network news at 9. Now, government agents know that you don't have to wait until network news at 9. When an issue breaks, you can address it on Twitter. And I just like that fact. So I think for me, at least in my age group, that is a significant difference from the way things were many years ago. So I think that's really good. I think Nigerian government has really embraced Twitter, so that's positive. On the other hand, I would say generally in terms of engagement and communications. Now, one thing that communications is supposed to do, the very definition of communications is that you transfer information and then you convey meaning. And you also receive feedback as well, and you take that on board to refine your approach going forward subsequently. I think in that space there are differentiations. So we find some government agencies that are taking a more intentional approach towards communications in terms of passing on information and then trying to convey meaning, and some that are not even attempting to convey meaning at all, may not even realize that they're supposed to be conveying meaning. It seems just to be like, just pass it to them. I think some government agencies are still struggling with the interactivity of social media, because in those days, traditional media, you would just issue a press release. Whether people were angry about it or not, it didn't matter. You didn't hear anything. There was no platform for people to air their opinion. So it was a one-way thing. You just dump it on the people and you walk off. But today, you're dropping in the tweet or a newspaper carries it. The reaction is almost immediate, and sometimes it's a backlash. So I think that transition, we're still seeing it unfolding before our eyes. And I would say some are better than others, but there's still a lot of room for improvement in that space. So I would say the fact that we have embraced Twitter, I think that's good, and other platforms, Facebook and rest of it, but particularly Twitter, I think is where the real-time response happens. But a lot needs to be done in terms of making that conveying meaning, as well as transferring your information, being more intentional about it, and being better prepared for, engaging and also responding, listening and responding appropriately as well. So I think that's where I'll leave it for now. Thank you.
Thanks, Shola. I think one of the big things that I picked up from, what you just said is two-way communication. So being able to manage, the things that are coming to the government in real time, I think I agree with you, is one of the places that, government officials and communicators can really, really improve on. Thank you for that. The next question, basically, I'm going to take to Adeshola. I set the stage in the sense that, and we are talking about it, that everyone is increasingly connected on the internet, and if not the internet, WhatsApp or WeChat or however. So news is traveling really fast everywhere. So, and citizens really want to see that the elected officials now are accountable. They want to see that they are doing their roles or performing their roles on a daily basis. How do you think leaders or public officials and their communication support really, how do you think that they can build a digital footprint that resonates, with this expectation from the citizens? And how do you think that they can be more transparent? Because in Nigeria, we're working in a very interesting context. Mistrust is at an all-time high. So it's also very interesting to see that play out on social media as well. So how do you think that elected officials now can, because it's never too late to start doing this, right? Can maybe track back, reflect, and work towards that?
Thank you very much, Corey. I'm very happy to be part of this panel today. To your point, public officials dealing with openness and the reality of modern new media, the immediacy, the audience participation, the user-generated content, all of that, it requires a significant change of attitude and a personal admittance of the reality of what communication is today. For example, elected officials have to see their constituents as partners in the process of governance rather than as oppositions, because it starts from willingness to communicate and what you consider your personal responsibility towards your constituents. There are those who believe that they can always find out when government makes press briefings. Such attitude does not indicate a sense of commitment, a sense that they owe the people any form of information or knowledge sharing. So it has to start from that point. Of course, that is what necessitated the passing of the Freedom of Information Act that allows citizens to proactively ask for specific public information. That is to deal with the attitude of information herding, which weakens citizens' ability to participate in the process of governance from the standpoint of knowledge. And having said that, the elected public officials themselves need to overcome their phobia for new media, and the digital media particularly. I remember Shola did mention the evolution that our generation has witnessed. Having come this far, there are many elected leaders that are yet to come to terms with the fact that this is what it is today, that the digital media would be prying, would be intrusive, in quote, if you like. So the need for accountability is higher now. And so that willingness has to be there. And it is that willingness that drives the interest in understanding how the new media itself works. Now, there are some leaders that are, despite the prevalence and the growing influence of Twitter and other forms of social media today, they are still pretty technophobic, if you like. You still have elected officials that don't run their own social media handle. I can understand from the standpoint of volume of information and ability to concentrate on strategic governance. But it's important to create a sense in your constituents that you owe them, and then to connect with them somewhat, even if it is a couple of times a week, to make sure that there's a process where the citizens can connect with you as an elected leader. So having a Twitter handle is good, but engaging the citizen is very, very important. And that is what makes them feel a sense of connection with you and validates your representation of them. So I think that's a very critical and a very important element for particularly elected public officials to ensure that they have that platform of connecting, and that once in a while they actually put themselves out there to engage in harmless forms with the citizens. So give a sense of that we are connected in some form, and not this aloof leader that we get to see only when the security apparatus allows us to see. So all of these are important for making a connection in the cyberspace functional and valuable and effective between public officials and the constituents. Thank you, Corey.
Thank you, Adeshola. I really appreciate your answers, and I will just summarize a little bit, right? There are some things that you said that really stood out to me, so that public officials should look at the citizens or their stakeholders basically as partners in the process of governance. That's one thing. And looking at them as partners would also help them to be more transparent in terms of information sharing, in terms of, letting their constituents know what they are doing at every point in time. Another big thing I picked out was connecting with their constituents on the social media platforms. So regardless of whoever is, running their platforms, we're making out time, because social media is also giving us platforms or tools like, Twitter Live or Facebook Live or Instagram Live to connect with people and get to have that two-way conversation. So it's not always going to be a situation where people are attacking you, but is when you provide a platform for that two-way conversation, it makes it a lot easier as a public official. So thank you for that. The next question I'm going to throw out to Chido, and because you're more of the academic here, and I'm very seasoned with your years of experience, well, what do you think are the qualities of very high performing government comms functions? Because increasingly these days, government communications can not only be limited just to media engagement. So what are the other things that you think a government communications professional should pay attention to, or a public official who wants to hire someone on their team, what should they look out for? Chido, please unmute.
Hello.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I think that I will approach this question from two angles. First is the general principles. We operate in a milieu where I sympathize with any one of us who is involved in public sector communication. Why do I say so? We have a situation where trust in government is at an all-time low, generally, globally, but it's worse in Nigeria. Trust in government by the latest Edelman Trust Barometer says that as at November last year, citizens trusted government just by 24%. Business was at 60%, NGOs were at 65%, and the media at 44%. Overall, the trust level was at 49%. So less than half of Nigerians trust anything that we are doing or saying to each other. That is a very tough situation to manage for communication. It then means that the communication person must really prepare well for the task. And our institute, our association, IABC, some 3 years ago, commissioned a study to say, okay, what do we do? What are the capabilities that communication professionals should bring to the table? That's the question you've asked. What should we bring to the table? And they identified 3 domains of work for us. There are communication capabilities, organizational capabilities, and professional capabilities. note them, that we, every communication person coming to the task, must bring communication capabilities, organizational capabilities, and professional capabilities. It's all well spelled out, but let me just mention those top three. For communication capabilities, we must bear in mind that our job is to ensure alignment of strategies with organizational purpose and balance. We should bring to the table purpose, communication strategies that align with the purpose of our organizations. Organizationally, our job is to facilitate relationships and build trust with internal and external stakeholders and communities. Facilitate relationships. That's why we are called public relations, all of those kinds of names. And then professionally, we must serve as valued counsel and be a trusted advisor. Valued counsel and be a trusted advisor. Now, what that means is that as we come to the communication task, we are bringing so many qualities, so many attributes beyond he is qualified. Those are basics. Because often, for instance, wherever you work in communication, you are the Rolodex, you are the database of your organization. I need to call the Inspector General of Police. Hey, go and ask PR people, they will have his number. We are expected to be multiple players. We're able to, if we can't find the information, then probably no one in the organization can find it. So basically, the communication person is now supposed to be an all-rounder. If you don't know, and the all-rounder doesn't mean you must know everything. One definition that I always find useful: the educated man is not the man who knows the answer to all things, but the one who knows where and how to find the answers. Google is our friend and must continue to be our friend. Thank you.
Thank you, Chido. Thank you for that. I love how you grouped it, right? And I'll just summarize. So a professional, government communications professional should, be able to strategize at every point in time. And whether these are proactive or reactive strategies, they should be very skilled at doing this. They should be able to facilitate relationships, be valued counsel and trusted advisors. And this one I totally agree with. And to be an all-rounder. So it's not okay to go into an organization and just say, I'm just communications. You need to know every single thing, but obviously understanding that other people can support you. Thank you, Chido, for that. So the panelists, I'm going to take a question from the Q&A. And I'm taking this question because it's very important to the conversation that we're having about transparency and accountability. And someone asked that elected officials need to engage with citizens, but we find that these officials try to stifle channels of communications with social media bill, right? Efforts by civil society organizations to kill the bill have not been successful thus far. What can be done to effectively delist the bill in the House? Shola, I'll throw this out to you and maybe take one more. Shola Abulu, and take one more. And take one. So just a very short answer for this. Thank you.
So I think it's just to continue to engage. I think it's for Nigerians to continue to make their feelings well known. On this whole issue about social media and how it's being used, I mean, it's a global challenge. We can take best practices from how the rest of the world is handling it as well. And I think civil society, like you said, has been very active in making their feelings known. And I think the more we continue to do that, eventually, I think that will, in fact, I think it has succeeded in terms of slowing down the progress of the bill, for one thing. And I think it's just to continue to engage and consult more. Shola had spoken about how, some people of this, I think of the older generation, let's be frank, are uncomfortable with social media. I think the more, and Chido then talked about the role of the communications person. The role of the communications person working in the public sector is to assuage the fears of his principal. if you're a communications person worth your salt, you should not be afraid of social media. It's not a threat, because you have an open space to be able to engage and put your own side of put your own side of it at play as well. It's only if you're afraid of transparency or you have something to hide that you should be afraid of social media. But in that case, even if you say you will, how would I say, you will sanction social media in a country, you can't sanction Nigerians in diaspora, for instance. So it's better you really begin to understand how to engage with this platform so that you can engage with the world at large. That's just the way it is. It's the world that we find ourselves. It's like people saying, you know, when computer came to overtake typewriter, you now say, no, you want to stay with typewriter. No, you can't unilaterally make that. The world has gone beyond that. It's about how do we then engage? What kind of skills do I need? What do my communications professionals need to know? How do I equip them? How do I learn from other people that manage social media? What works? And there are best practices even within Nigeria. So I just think our role is for us to continue to work the process. Civil society will continue to engage. We will have the conversations, and by the grace of God, the will of the people will be done. But you know, I think that the engagement that we have been doing has made a lot of impact, and I think people should continue to make their voice heard.
Thank you, Shola. Adeshola, I also wanted you to answer this, because being in the oil and gas sector, you've also maybe experienced some things around bills and all of that. And just to have an understanding that one of the reasons why I'm very interested in this question is that it can also increase the mistrust, right? For governments in general, that people are feeling like they're not being heard. So how do you think, you know, a government communications professional who is handling, you know, this or working with his or her principal, how can they start to engage a bit more and maybe explain what this bill means to Nigerians?
Thank you very much. There are two angles to this. One is from the angle of attempt by public officials to stifle the growing voice of the populace and through the platform offered by the social media. The other is the dealing with a communications person in the public space, in the public service, helping the principal to navigate the precarious waters of trusts and mistrust around what the social media platforms represent and the potential, the exposure that they feel, how to assuage their fears in that regard. And I would say I would support Shola Bulu in the sense that engagement always works. And you know, it's a progressive world. It's a progressive world, and there are opportunities for specific and targeted advocacy available. The world is networked right now through the emergence of social media. There are different groups around the world who can raise petitions against the same subject locally. So effectively, from the standpoint of social media communication platforms, the world is global in nature. It's global, both global and local. So citizens of a particular country, like in the case of Nigeria, dealing with what they considered a bill that is inimical to free speech, have friends in the United States, for example, an environment that is noted for advocating free speech, has friends in other countries around the world where they have growing advocacy systems in favor of free speech. All of this can network to bring significant amount of pressure against such bill. If people will explore the power that they have, every aspect of governance is networked today. So you can exert pressure in one aspect of governance to gain leverage in another. So these are all opportunities that are open to today's communicator, both from the citizens level and from the professional level. Talking about the professional who is handling his principal, you know, the less you know about anything, the more scared of it you are. And conversely, the more knowledge you acquire about anything, the more comfortable or the less agitated you are around them. A lot of the agitation that public officials have around the potential of social media to embarrass, to harass, and to intimidate, and to terrorize, if you like, they evolve from the from limited knowledge, limited interaction with the media itself, with the social media platform itself. You know, the more you engage, the more you understand how it works, the more you even master how to tailor your own messaging in response to some of the issues that are evolving in the public space. So I believe the communication professional has a huge task of helping their principal to gain additional fluency around the management of social media. I did this in the past. I had one of the most academic, one of the most philosophical communicators in human history that I've ever worked with. But his practice came to a point where the social media was evolving. And I kept telling him that is the place to go. But for a very long time, even he did not have an active LinkedIn page. So I knew I had to do this. We were throwing statistics at each other, defending one perspective and the other. He defending why he didn't think we should do social media, and I advocating why we will regret it very shortly if we do not. So I had to take him aside at an international conference. I had a sidebar with him and give him convincing analysis of what could happen if he has a functional LinkedIn page. And he agreed, and that worked. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Adeshola. Thank you for your answers for that. So I hope to the anonymous attendee we've done that question justice. The next question I will take, and I'm taking a cue from the chat box that I'm seeing. Do you think that government officials in Nigeria are leveraging all the communications channels in Nigeria to reach out to different age groups? And this question was asked by Vivian in the chat box. And she says that, there are constant generational changes in social media channels used by different age groups. So what are your thoughts about how government communications is leveraging such platforms? So like, TikTok, Twitter, WhatsApp. To be honest with you, one I can't even get on really, Clubhouse. I will try. But so what are your thoughts around this? Shola Abuda, I'll throw it to you. Then I'll also get Chido to comment as well.
So thanks, Corey. I think government officials on Clubhouse is not a bad idea. But I think it would take somebody who is very social media savvy to be able to do that. And you must be somebody that you are willing to engage in a sort of debate sort of platform. But I would welcome a forum where a government official is able to go, a tightly well moderated Clubhouse chat, because really that back and forth engagement, I think that would be good. So that's something that I would say, if I was a communications professional working with someone who really wanted to make a difference in terms of the way in which they engage with Nigerian citizens, I would do that. I would honestly recommend that, particularly on issues that you require, like town halls. That would be like a wonderful town hall to have in the lockdown. We don't have to live where we're going, and but that's, like I said, not everyone can handle that. I think TikTok, that's neither here nor there. I think, again, when we talk about strategic communications, it's really about the objective. We don't just use channels simply because they exist. Even in a business sense, I always advocate to people, don't just throw open accounts. You really need to find out what is useful for where your audience is, where your customers, and what serves your interest best, and which platform works best for you. And it has to be very targeted. So for instance, if you're going to TikTok, it must be a deliberate strategy to reach the people, the demographic there. So I would imagine that it's not every government organization or agency that would be relevant for. But if you really want to maybe like get a certain demographic like Gen Z or whatever, then TikTok should be your place, and you should really look at that. But if you are not actively targeting Gen Z, you may not use TikTok. I have noticed that, so there's a lot of use of Twitter and WhatsApp. And Twitter, I think it's more, I like Twitter. I like government engaging on Twitter because I think they do it under their official handle. Their official handle, so we know where it's coming from. A trend I have noticed recently in WhatsApp, which is highly I mean, I find it as a communications person, I find it, let me not use the word, I find it irritating, let me just put it that way, is when sponsored posts are seeded into WhatsApp, giving the impression to the unsuspecting public that it is a concerned citizen writing. And for me, that is a trend that I would ask any communications professional working to really not encourage, because for some of us, when we see it, we can tell that this is not from any consult, because first of all, they're always so biased. They're actively pushing a particular narrative, and it's almost like the sort of like propaganda-ish sort of past that we're coming from, which brings it to another point in that today's social media world, that deliberate, intentional spill, it just doesn't work anymore. You have to find a balanced way of putting your things across. So I do take the point that yes, generational changes. I would say every government agency, which demographic are you trying to target, which best works for you, and then use it the best. But please try, don't, I would advocate that every communications professional make sure that we don't do things that makes it look as if we are playing on people's intelligence, even in the using of those platforms, because it can really it can go the wrong way.
Okay. Thank you, Shola, for the answer. And one thing that I'll pick out, and this is for everyone who is a government communicator or not, is being able to manage misinformation and disinformation. Because this is one of the downsides of social media and having news travel around in real time. So travels accurate and non-accurate information or fake news travels faster. So basically, it's one skill basically is being able to manage that and having strategies to manage that. So I'll take a question. Chido, I'll throw this to you from Dr. Costello. Joyce Costello. And she said, what skill do you think are critical for public sector communication specialists to improve as the information environment subject matter expert? I know you've spoken to it a little bit, but just to rehash a little bit will be best. Chido, please unmute.
Thank you for the question. Once again, I go back to first principles. I will tackle both questions as it were. One of the things I've found is that we have moved from traditional media, moved on to the online media, and there is a plethora of platforms, but we then have the problem. We are not doing what we should do in basic public relations, which is research. The PR model talks about research, action, communication, and evaluation. Communication is the third step. What we normally do is we move A and C and ignore R and E. So action, communication. Sometimes even communication without action. Before action, we just talk. It's not working. Two, the need for segmentation. We are not doing enough of that. So, and the social media is now presenting us with that problem. There are too many platforms, and the young people have chosen their platforms. The older generation have chosen their platforms. Who at each point in time do you want to speak to? Who is your audience? And therefore, your audience will determine the platform, the channel that you want to use. But what we do is, okay, let's do social media. So we just go everywhere. Everywhere. It's not working. That's one challenge. Dr. Costello's point is about, let me now see again, the skills critical for public sector communication specialists. Yeah. I will emphasize research once more. I have mentioned the fact that we have a low trust environment. What is causing that low trust? How is that affecting what we say? In those early days of studying public relations, the Chinese said, you cannot carve on rotten wood. So if you have an environment where people are already doubting the message that you're bringing forth, you have to go back and ensure that your messages are credible. So we have a situation where it seems to me that we are overloading communication rather than overloading action and research. The basis of the mistrust is because the communication that we are sending out does not cohere with the reality of our people. They see it, we say it, but it's not true in their lives. So our job as communication professionals is that trusted counsel, trusted advisor, to get those government officials, all of those who are supposed to execute properly. Then we communicate. We can communicate, and we have shown it, and we are doing it. But what are we communicating? Does it hold true for our people? That's my concern. Thank you.
Thank you, Chido. Thank you for that. But one big thing that I picked out again, and I like this, being a communications professional, government communications professional, being a trusted counsel and advisor. But another big thing that I picked out from what you said is being able to understand the needs of the people is also key. So going back to the strategy, listening as well on social media. So social media is also a great mine for professionals to listen properly to what people are asking, what people need, and to respond in a targeted way. So thank you, Chido, for that. Shola, I'm going to throw this question to you right now. You know, the social media age has made individuals a lot more powerful, right? And giving them unlimited access to information. And some of it is not credible. Some definitely credible, some not credible. People can attack and nothing would happen. And a compounding factor is mistrust, really. And this is outpacing the government's response. We can see that at every point in time. Sometimes there's a comment or criticism that goes out on social media and the government doesn't respond almost immediately. And this is not peculiar to Nigeria. We saw it with the royal family. They responded how many days after? So, so just to put that into context, so how do you think that communications professional working in the public sector can create effective government messaging and opportunities for that two-way dialogue between governments and their citizens, or governments and the stakeholders that they are answerable to?
So it seems like a simple question, but there is no simple answer. There are lots of things that need to happen. I think, first of all, it's about the intent. The intent must be sincere from the get-go. So the intent of, the government or the person who is trying to communicate must be sincere. I think a fundamental realization that the world has changed. I still think that a lot of people are still struggling with that shift. And the fact that they're struggling with that shift is making them wanting to resist where the shift is pushing them towards. Because in this kind of, what it means, for instance, like there are many ways in which we can answer this. We can look at what Chido said. If you have citizens, you should be researching about your citizens. You should be listening. You should understand the perspectives and the pain points. You should know that if there are certain things that come out, it's likely to touch on the raw for these people from this part of Nigeria at this part of time or this. You should then be able to nuance your communications or have your strategy around how you are going to communicate on those issues. These are things that we are taught in the private sector. But I do understand that in public sector, it's a bit different because when you have political power, it sort of gives you a sense of feeling that you can do and undo because but then social media, like you said, has democratized that. So I think that realization of that shift is what we all have to adjust to. So find out much more about people and see how you can respond to them. Have a strategy around responding and do try to respond. But then hire professionals who know what they need to do. I always say that if any communications that succeeds in getting people more angry is failed communications, except if your intention was to annoy people. If your intention was to annoy, then you have succeeded. But if the intention was to de-escalate the issue, and then you put out a statement or a response, and people got annoyed, it has failed. It's either you did not watch your language, you didn't watch the tone, you didn't understand the red flags that were in what you were saying. So in other words, you lacked knowledge about the audience you were speaking to. Social media, you need to have, even those of us that use social media for business, the only reason you can reach your customer is when you understand what the customer needs, he wants. It's just the same. So if a government or a government agency or a public sector agency lacks information about a certain demographic, please go and find out. Do the research, get people who know better, and test your messaging. That's another thing I think is not being done. Because there's certain messaging that come out that if you had tested it with a certain demographic or the people you were trying to address, people will have told you, no, you can't say this. Which is why, again, a communications professional has to be, there are about 5 eyes, but I will talk about 3. You have to have a certain level of independence. You have to be able to bring in external insights, and you have to be able to take initiative. If you're a communications professional and you're a rubber stamp, sorry, you're not a communications professional that is qualified to do communications in the 21st century. If all you're doing as a communications professional is what they tell me to do, whether it is right, whether you know that it's going to set everywhere ablaze, you just go ahead and do it without giving your own insights, then really, I don't think you should be in that role. Because social media today is a potential time bomb. And when I see, there's a question in the chat, somebody talking about defamation and what do you do? And for me, the issue is this: newspapers, before social media, let's not get all, before social media, I know somebody who, a UK newspaper, ran a story about a 419 person, and they used his picture for it, mistakenly. A UK newspaper, a Nigerian, that wasn't social media. It cost him a lot of problem. It wasn't social media. And it went everywhere because people saw it, on the website. It wasn't on social media, so it wasn't on Twitter, it wasn't on Facebook, but it was on the UK paper's online site. He spent, and it was a mess. So these problems have been there. There was defamation when I was younger. We're all aware of that. There's been libel. So it's not a new thing. And if you like I said, if you like, sanction social media all you like in a country, how will you handle Nigerians in diaspora? So we had better find a better way, because the point is people can always say what they want to say, but the issue is there are libel laws that take care of that, and then you can that can be addressed. And what the civil society people say is that our libel laws are sufficient to actually take care of some of these things. So I don't necessarily think that you don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, that because people will use something, it's like internet and 419. You say, okay, because people are using internet for 419, then we shut down the internet. That's excessive, So it has to be, how do we create a safe space for people to protect themselves from those people who want to do harm? Thank you.
Sean, I'm going to keep you here a bit longer because there's a follow-up question/comment, right? And this is from Nkechi Ali Balogun. And she said she's particularly concerned about the feedback system in government, especially in the area of crisis management, that there's a lot of early warning signs embedded in the communications of users of digital platforms, and yet we end up having the worst kind of conflicts and crises. How can we as communicators ensure that we channel some of these messages to government to elicit some feedback? Secondly, in this age of infodemics, what is our strategy to curb the damages being done?
So I think, first of all, and Nkechi, thanks for joining. I think you've answered part of the question, because if there's a lot of feedback coming in through your social media channels and you are choosing to ignore it and then speak in a way that is even aggravating that response, I personally, this is my personal view, I believe that a lot of people in our generation and older, my generation and older, are still struggling with this shift. You remember that culturally, when the older person says something, in our culture, when somebody who is older or higher than you talks, is law, you're not supposed to respond. So we're very used to that top-down communications, I have the power, I say it. So this democratization of communications is a major, some people are really struggling with it. Some people in government welcome it, but some others are really struggling with that shift. That's what I think. So even when the feedback comes, they assume that the political position gives them power over that feedback and that they can talk down over the feedback. And that has not been successful. And I can also see a lot of frustration, and I can relate to it because I also lived in the time when there was no social media, and I was politically aware at that time as well. And really, the government narrative ruled the airwaves then. Even if people had questions, there was nowhere to air the questions. So there's a lot of transformation that needs to take place, I think, in terms of how government and the people who advise people in government, in public sector, really, address some of these issues. I do see some people who are careful. I don't want to mention names, but I do see some public officials who watch the language of what they say, who watch the tone. They are sensitive, even though when they respond, people may not like it, but I notice that the response is not as bad as it is with others, because there are some people, when you don't watch your language, you don't watch your tone, you don't take an external perspective to what you are saying. You are speaking, forgetting the diversity of the audience, and then you say it in a way that some people are happy with you, another section is completely upset. Meanwhile, you are government to all. There's an issue. So there's a way to balance these things. But again, if you do not have communications professionals who understand and are able to be assertive enough and can weave the messaging for you in a way that you balance it, because at the end of the day, it's about content. So you can still say what you want to say, but don't say it in the way that it will aggravate people or trigger people. I mean, we've had a lot of that, like Nkechi has pointed out to in recent times, and it's made the issue worse. It's triggered people even more. So I think there is opportunity for a lot of self-reflection on the part of leadership, our political leadership, to really look at what could have been done differently in some of these cases. Then to the question around infodemic, I think, like I said, it's a global challenge. The time I went, I did a bit of research on it, very little. I found out that even the UN had guidance. The coronavirus, for instance, was a major global challenge around information. And it was everywhere, because people were coming up with all sorts of home remedies, people were saying all sorts of things. Everybody was becoming an expert. So every nation had a challenge. I mean, let's talk about the case in America where a president actually recommended, I won't repeat it, the kind of thing he recommended people to do. So all of that was happening, and creating real tension. And people, so it's a global challenge. So for me, the issue is, how are other countries managing it? And how do you can manage information, whatever, by being open, by explaining. Now, there's what we call explainer communications. Explainer communications is when you explain things, you break it down. But you cannot do thorough explainer communications when you don't have audience segmentation. You do not know enough about your audience, and you are not even, humble enough to try and understand them. Because if you want to do explainer communications, you will sit down and explain to people. If you need to do short videos, you do short videos. If you need to do a thread, you will do a thread. When people critique you, you respond. You know what I'm saying? This is how it is done everywhere where it works. And Nigerians welcome it. I have seen people do this. Nigerians yes, we have the outliers of people who will be activists or upset regardless, but the broad section of Nigerians just want to feel like they're being heard. That is all. And if you just make them feel like they are being heard, whether or not you are even able to change the situation immediately, it does buy you some time to begin to do something. So I think there's a lot of scope for us as communicators to really make a difference in this space. Sorry, Corey, I've overrun.
Yeah, thank you. I didn't want to cut you short, but thank you. I hope that we've answered Nkechi's questions, but and just to summarize and add a little bit around misinformation and disinformation. So it's not even only limited to Nigeria, as you said, but every organization or government organization should also think about having specific strategies to address it, whether you go from listening on social media and listening on social media, making sure that you're keeping in touch or you're on top of every conversation that is happening, also anticipating, what the conversations will be or potential issues, and dealing with it even before it becomes a crisis will be very useful as well. So the next question I'm going to ask, I'm going to take this to Chido. And it's just basically within certain areas of the private sector and public sector, people may undervalue the role of communications. And you see this in a lot of organizations where people don't really regard their communications professionals, while the communications professionals should be sitting on the table, basically, making it an underinvested function, even in government, really. So how can a professional responsible for this function change that narrative with the people that they work with, and show the relevance and impact of a communications function?
Thank you very much. It's a question that speaks to my lived experience in the private sector. Many years ago, I was in Cadbury, Nigeria. I was media manager, and I had a tested broadcaster and communications professional as head of department, Mr. Kevin Ejiofor. One of the things we did, the reason in all of the communication I do, I emphasize research, listening. We carried out a perception audit of stakeholders of Cadbury, Nigeria. That audit brought results that shook the entire organization. Some of the truths that we held to be self-evident, our staff said it's not true. Hello, it's not true. This thing that you say, this thing, we are a meritocratic organization. They said, no, there are other factors that come into play. Hello, this was shocking. So just with one exercise, communication was now playing a role in HR, in strategy, and all of that, just by using basic research. So usually I say to us, we have the tools in our skill sets as communication professionals. What you find is that we are not using it enough. We are not making the case for it. So there's usually a pushback. You want to do an audit, you want to do research, and they say, no, we don't have money for that. Insist, please, because the results will place communication at a higher level. There's also the other factor in the private sector. They say the language of business is what? Numbers. What numbers are we generating in communication? We generate our numbers when we do our media monitoring properly, when we do our audits properly and say this number of persons responded to this, these were their views and percentages, averages. We are not doing enough of that. Even the HR people, they put things together like a number of persons who came to work, and they present those figures as if they are earth-shaking figures. But we also have figures and we are not presenting it. So we should do a lot more of speaking the language of business through numerology, and to conduct research using our tool sets. We have the skill sets to do those things that attract the attention of everybody within the organization. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Chido, for that. And some things I picked out: speaking the language of the business is extremely key, regardless of where you're working, even in government agencies. Research, and if I might add change management, in terms of, even allowing your colleagues to see the value of the work that you do at every point in time. So thank you for that. So the next question I'm going to ask Adeshola is, what are the most critical changes that we must make to face the future effectively? So a lot of communications professionals or governments, they just go with the flow, basically. But I think that increasingly, especially with technology, for example, I was in a session talking about artificial intelligence, and social media and PR. You know, how do you think that, what are those changes that we must make to basically face this future effectively?
Thank you, Corey. Both Shola Bulu and Chido did lay very solid background for the response to this question. First of all, we cannot overemphasize the need for the public communicator to be a person of research. You cannot effectively function in today's world without crunching numbers, without contextualizing your communication in the language that people speak. So right now, generalized information presentation no longer suffices. So we're looking at a generation of convergence. The audience dynamics is changing. The information consumption behavior is changing. Mass communication that studies writing and literature is good, but no longer suffices. The statistical capabilities and all of those things are becoming critically important in managing communication in the public space, particularly because of the way the evolving populace consumes information. And any communicator in the public space that wants to be successful must definitely have a very solid understanding of that audience dynamics and pay close attention. Because again, you need to determine who you are speaking with too. Like Chido rightly mentioned earlier, if you have an issue, you're managing an issue that is related to a segment of the population, or you are using a platform that is frequented by a different segment of the population, you lose your audience. And that knowledge is very important. But one more thing another thing that I'd like to talk about is what Chido has also mentioned around budgeting, around making adequate financial provision to power communication. It is no longer the era of newspaper clippings and a cutting news reports from the internet. It's scientific, absolutely scientific. I remember we had a crisis, a major crisis, one of those big crises that oil industry hates to have, you know, which had tremendous backlash from various stakeholders. Now, as a communication professional, crisis communication is what I live and breathe every day in the industry in which I work. To address the issue is not something you want to deal with in a hurry. What I mean by that is that you do not expect that this issue will go away in a minute. So you prepare for a long-term, a strategic fight, if I may use that word. In doing that, you yourself have to be scientific. As a matter of fact, the strategy we developed involved significant intellectual input. We had to dovetail into specific communication theory to drive our strategy. Very key. So eventually, by the time we came out, I remember Shola giving me a call and congratulating me in managing it in a specific way. I'm managing what I'm sharing right now. So, but the point was that by the time management wanted to know, what did you do? How did you do this? So I made a presentation to the leadership of the organization. Again, this is not trumpet blowing. This is what we all do. But the point was that because it was structured, it was deliberate, it was purposive, it was intellectual, at every point in time, people could see that we practically deliberately did certain things to achieve certain results. And we had great understanding of our stakeholders, and every single approach specifically addressed certain things we found out by research about our stakeholders. So eventually, midway into the presentation, it was interrupted by a clap, which was unusual at such meetings. The point being made is that today's communicator cannot afford to be unfriendly with research. It is the foundation of what you do. And now, if the organization does not make available adequate funding for that function,
Thank you, Shola. You said a lot. Adeshola, you said a lot. I just wanted to let the attendees know, if you have more questions, please just drop it, because I'll take some questions in the next maybe 5 minutes before we wrap up and leave, basically. But thank you for even answering a question that an anonymous attendee put up about what do panelists think about hiring ex-journalists to manage government communications, because in the US, there's a difference between press relations and strategic communication. So thank you, Adeshola, for even speaking to that before, before it came to you. But a lot of things that I picked up, having data, upskilling. You know, a lot of our colleagues in government communications are not upskilling as fast as the ones in the private sector. And also for the person that puts up this question about hiring ex-journalists, there also needs to be a lot of mentality shift from, you know, media relations to strategic communications, with media relations being a part of that. So, and funding as well. And this also comes from, you know, the importance that, you know, government officials or agencies place on communications alone. So funding as well is a big thing. So thank you for that. I'll look at some questions from the Q&A box, and we try to wrap up in the next 4 minutes. Let me see. So someone was still talking about the social media bill. As a PR consultant, I've had to manage situations where clients are defamed by people hiding behind social media handles. So the first question we should ask is, what is the content and extent of this social media bill? Even journalism has its regulations and rules. I think that's more of a comment, but I just wanted to highlight it, you know, for us to think about. So I think those are the questions that I don't have any more questions here. If at all you have any questions, you can always tweet at IABC West Africa Interest Group, and we can get one of the panelists to respond as well. So with that, maybe I'll just throw out one last nice question. And Chido, maybe you give us the honors to wrap up this one. So how can value be created through managing knowledge in an e-government to constituencies without jeopardizing the integrity of governance? because we're talking a lot about transparency. So where do government officials or, government communicators draw that line? So without jeopardizing integrity of governance, sensitivity, and security of information coming from the public sector.
Thank you very much. It starts with trust. You have to establish is organizational culture. What is the culture of the organization? Have you built up the trust level in your organization that enables the sharing of information? Because don't forget that now in the e-environment, the information can go outside fast. Just somebody clicks on his computer and it goes everywhere. So the corporate culture is key. So before you start sharing information, have you established a culture of one, trust, a culture of integrity, a culture of belief in the organization? These are the values that we hold there. Therefore, everybody must comply with those values. Once those are in place, sharing whatever information is no longer a challenge, but that culture must be in place. That's what I would suggest.
Thank you, Chido, and thank you for all our attendees here for your time. I believe that we've had a really interesting conversation, and this is not just because, it is a very timely time to talk about these things, especially with a lot of the things we've been seeing in our environment, engagement with the public sector, and all of that. So it's really, really timely. And for me, one big takeaway is to also reach out to my colleagues in government and also support a lot more. And they're just to wrap up, there are lots of conversations that came up around the social media bill, around government communicators being trusted counsels and advisors, having strategies to manage, proactive and reactive communications, data, and this comes from monitoring at every point in time and listening to what everyone is saying. Two-way feedback and being able to keep up with that is tough, but is definitely something that can be done. And also upscaling. This cannot be taken for granted. At every point in time, we're lifelong learners, things are changing, getting older, the new generation is coming up with, different innovations. So being able to upskill, be knowledgeable, and to advise properly. So with that, I would say thank you to all the panelists, Adeshola, Chido, Shola. Thank you to IABC West Africa Interest Group, the team behind this. You've done amazing, amazing work coordinating this. And to our attendees, this was very, very engaging. I love that, it was a back and forth and we took questions and, it was pretty interactive. Thank you for your time. And for other comments that you have, please tweet at us at IABC West Africa Interest Group. Go on LinkedIn, drop comments. Let us continue this conversation and let's continue to advocate and support our colleagues that are in the government, and also, open up the eyes of the government officials to what they're supposed to do to maintain civic engagement, build and maintain trust. Thank you, everyone, and do have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.